if we're going to send hockey players home, we should send everybody home, right? It's not just hockey players. There's a lot of other people here who are making a living. But one of the things I was so glad to see the Polish soccer team step up and say, we're not going to play against them. And I think international hockey should say, we're not going to let them play in the World Junior Hockey Tournament. I think we got to, as Canadians, take that stance since the games are going to be played in Edmonton.
Canceling Russia, the whole world is doing it, including the sports world. Droves of leagues and federations are dumping Russia from international competitions. I'm here with Brian Lilly, as well as John McCarthy, to break it all down. Guys, first of all, let's start with hockey. Obviously, that's near and dear to all of our hearts. And we've got Wayne Gretzky saying that the Russian team should not be competing this summer in Alberta. Brian, let's go to you first. What are your thoughts?
I think a good move to start canceling national teams. I think it's a bit more difficult for NHL clubs who have Russian players living in Canada or in the United States to say that they're going to stop working with them. But we've seen CCM has said they're not going to be using any promotions involving Ovechkin because of him being Russian, but also his close ties with Vladimir Putin.
It's just a dream. Go back to sleep.
Look, on the international stage, absolutely the right thing to do, because as we all know, like when the Olympics come on, Canadians suddenly get interested in sports in ways that they didn't. So it's not just the hardcore fans, it's the average citizen, it's national pride. And suddenly you become an expert in a sport you've never watched just because there's a Canadian competing. Well, Russia, I think that they held off on the invasion till after the Olympics because they wanted to show how strong and glorious Russia was with all those medals they were winning. The Olympics were over. They started the invasion. Now there's no more sports involving Russians. And ordinary people will notice that and be upset and question their national leadership.
So, J-Mac, what do you think? Are people going to notice? Are fans going to really take notice if Russia doesn't appear in some of these international competitions?
Well, I agree that in international competitions, it was the right move to ban Russia. International competition at its very essence is sort of based on the fact that there's a global community. I mean, that's why we get together. It's sort of a celebration that we're able to care about something that matters as little as sports, but it is all predicated on the global community. And when you start breaking the very easy rules of membership, like you can't, start shooting missiles at your next door neighbor, you don't get to come along for the fun parts. So I think that it only makes sense to ban them from international competition. I do think it changes a bit because we're seeing such widespread bans now, like Russian teenagers no longer able to be drafted to the Canadian Hockey League. That's where I think it might be a mistake, because we have to differentiate between the Russian government, which everybody is mad at, Vladimir Putin, and then actual Russian people. Like our beef isn't with Russian people, our beef is with the Russian government. And what's the end supposed to be? We're trying to show the Russians that maybe they're getting propaganda or misinformation from their government. When you ban them from international competition, you hope they notice and start thinking poorly about Putin and their government. But when you start, messing with people's children and grandchildren and even cats, there's been cats banned from Russian cat shows. When you start messing with people's grandchildren and children, I start wondering whether you're achieving what you've set out to do in the first place, or maybe actually doing the opposite.
Please, no more war. It doesn't matter who is in the war, Russia, Ukraine, different countries. I think we live in a world we have to live in peace.
So I mentioned off the top Wayne Gretzky speaking out. I want to get both your takes, though, on Russian players in the NHL and what their responsibilities are to speak out on this. Obviously, one of the biggest faces in the NHL, Alexander Ovechkin, his Instagram profile picture is one of him and Vladimir Putin smiling, standing next to one another. Now, Ovechkin said no more war, and he doesn't want war between any countries as a way of speaking out against this. However, he still has that profile picture up.
Well, he's my president, but how I said, I'm not in politics, I'm an athlete.
Brian, what do you think NHL players, how involved, how outspoken should they be, or even can they be?
I don't look to NHL players for my political, discussion any more than I look to musicians to lead me in what to think there. But Ovechkin is a major figure, both here and in Russia. And that profile pic, that bothers me. Dominic Hasek had some nasty words for Ovechkin over his "No More War" comments because they were couched in a lot of wishy-washy, mushy language.
It's hard. It's a hard situation. I have a family back in Russia, and it's scary moments. But we can't do anything. We just hope it's gonna be ended soon, and everything's gonna be all right.
And I can get the difficult spot that Ovechkin's in with that, especially with he has family back there. Will they retaliate against his family if he's too strong against Putin? So fine, that's understandable. But having your profile pic on your Instagram, it's not on his Twitter page, by the way. I believe it's him playing hockey on Twitter, but having him pose with Putin, that's a bad look for Ovi. And I think he should definitely just change that quietly, put it to him playing hockey, and then stay away from the political discussion, perhaps. I don't think that individual Russian players have a responsibility to speak up and get involved politically. Any of them want to say the war is wrong, I'd welcome that, but I don't think they have a responsibility.
Yeah, I would agree. I do think the easy things to do would be, to quietly, like you said, take down that profile picture. I do sort of have a problem with nowadays everybody and every company sort of has to have a opinion on everything that happens in the world. I mean, this one's a little easier because it's a sort of a cut and dry issue. But a lot of these Russian players, they probably have family, maybe wives and children in Russia. So if they come out and say something, very strongly worded, who knows what happens at home? I do think people should be judged individually on their comments. But I don't care. Like Brian says, I don't care what athletes generally think about politics or musicians, or nowadays it's everything. It's companies too. Like, I don't care where Palmolive stands on politics usually, but you end up finding out anyhow. So it's just sort of the world we live in, where everything is about everything, and I think that's all kind of stupid.
Do you think there's an agent, Daniel Milstein? He represents more than 24 NHL players that hail from Russia. Do you think that there's a possibility, Brian, that we could see some of these players, if they don't speak out, or if they speak out in favor of Putin, being removed from the league altogether?
I don't see that. I could see them facing some pressures, perhaps in their local markets. Like, Ovi plays in Washington, D.C. Joe Biden is the president and lives there, and the American political machine is there, and they are helping lead the charge to support Ukraine. So, does he start to feel pressure in his local market? Perhaps. But there are contracts in place for all of these players, and many of them end up staying here, living here after their career is over. So are they going to, have those contracts ripped up? I think you'd see some lawsuits pretty quickly. It's interesting, on the international stage, it's easy. For the NHL, more than most leagues, more than the NBA, more than any other, they have to deal with this issue of Russian players, and it has become front and center. I don't think it's fair to put it on the individual players. If the individual players start speaking out in favor of Vladimir Putin and invading Ukraine, I think they would feel an awful lot of public displeasure with them, but I don't see them getting kicked out of the league.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also think it's sports. At the end of the day, it ends up being the star players basically can get away with whatever they want. If it's a player that doesn't really matter as much to the team, they might be quietly dealt with differently than the stars. And that's sort of when some of the political activism of the sports world sort of looks a little fake, is when you see star players being treated differently than the rest of the players.
J-Mac, I know we spoke before about international sports competitions. I know you're a big fan. Will there be an asterisk besides teams that win without Russia's presence?
I don't think there will be. I don't think there should be either. I mean, if you look, it's actually more, there should maybe more be an asterisk beside Russian victories in the last 40, 50 years, now that we know how deeply their doping, government sanctioned doping regime was. So I think that might deserve an asterisk more than this. I mean, this is, like we said, it's an international competition. And if you're not a member of the global community, you don't deserve to be there. The people that line up, they're not concerned with who's not there. They're concerned with who's beside them or who's across from them on the court. And they deserve, whatever medal or position they get.
Putin's an egomaniac. He loves sports. I'd have to think, and I hope that he feels very, very slighted by the fact that Russian teams will not be in some of these international competitions. Before I let you both go, I want to go around the horn. Brian, does this hurt Putin's ego?
It hurts his ego. So it's not going to hurt as much as the economic sanctions in terms of real on the ground feel for Russian people, but it will hurt the ego. It will hurt national pride. And sometimes hurt pride stings a lot more than some other things.
J-Mac?
Yeah, I would agree. And as much as it hurts or humiliates Putin, I think it's more important the effect it has on the everyday Russian citizen. And when Putin has built a lot of the power of his country based on imagery and strength, I do think when they look at the World Cup or the hockey or even the curling and see that their country's not invited, the hope is that starts making them have some questions about their leadership as much as they can do about it.
Okay, let us know what you think down below. Are you happy the sports world is cutting ties with Russia? Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.